Thank you so much for Marty and Kate and Scott and Chick-fil-A and David and Michael and Josh and those others, Lord, who've been on the call with us the last couple weeks. And just pray, Father, your blessing upon their ministries as I've been praying for them this last week, and just asking, God, that you would just anoint them and give them your grace and your favor as we seek to love young people. So, God, we just ask for your favor now as we dive into this last session, session number 4 of molding student leaders. So, God, I ask for your Holy Spirit to join me in this conversation and to guide me in Jesus' name. Amen. Cool, cool. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. You guys probably can't see when somebody's trying to get onto the waiting room because I'm the only person that can see that. Okay. All right, well, let's go ahead. I'll just share my screen, and hopefully everybody that's going to be on the call is here. Where did my PowerPoint screen go? You know that awkward moment? Like, who's had like 57 awkward moments on Zoom calls with students where you're like, there's that awkward pause where you can't find the game or the thing, and you're like, yeah. Okay, I'm glad we can all relate with each other. That's good that I'm not alone in the struggle. Okay, I think I have what I need here. All right, share screen. There it is. All right. Okay, so we are on session number 4 here. And this comes from chapter 4 of my book, First Century Youth Ministry, which is actually entitled The Keys to the Kingdom. And so it's kind of a play off of Jesus's passing of the keys in Caesarea Philippi, in his conversation with Peter and the other disciples. And so I've got some fun teaching from that moment in Caesarea Philippi. But before we get started, just to kind of get to know each other a little bit more, and maybe Scott can give a shout out since he can't type right now because you're back in the office with Chick-fil-A. Like, wow, you have a Chick-fil-A really close to your office. That's
all right.
Good.
So I'm going to switch quick here. I'm going to leave the meeting and rejoin. So I could be on my computer, right?
That works. We'll see you soon.
All right.
Okay, so what do you find to be the most challenging aspect of youth ministry? And if you could travel to anywhere in the world, where would you go? So since there's just a few of us on the call today, why don't we just go ahead and unmute ourselves and you can share. Oops. So Marty, you go first. What's the most challenging aspect of youth ministry? And if you could travel anywhere in the world, where would you go?
Well, if I could travel anywhere in the world, I've always wanted to go to Italy because I love Italian food, and I would love to go to Italy.
Nice.
The most challenging aspect for me, it's getting the group to kind of have a family feel to it. Because I've been trying to address this last couple weeks, but people are still not really coming to youth group as much because of COVID and that or whatever else. But, I have students that go to so many different school districts, and sometimes the only time they see each other is at youth group on Sunday nights. And so that's the most challenging aspect for me, is trying to create a family atmosphere in the youth group.
I get that. Thanks for sharing that, Marie. What about you, Kate?
I don't know what the most challenging thing is. Yeah, I think probably some of the stuff I shared last week, like wrestling through making it fun and interactive and engaging, but also like deep. Figuring out how to do that. It can be really hard because and then travel, I don't know, there's so many good spots I want to go to, but I think I would have to say, if I had to choose one, I'd probably choose Turkey, because I don't know, I'm just fascinated by the culture there and the amount of history and beautiful buildings and nature. So
nice.
Turkey
is a big biblical site too, so
yeah,
that's super fun. You could do some
history.
All right, Scott wants me to let him back in, but I don't see where he has tried to rejoin. So let me see. I'm going to text him real quick and see what's going on. I will share as I'm trying to figure out what's going on with him. I think the most challenging aspect of student ministry is finding the balance with serving families while at the same time not causing over busyness or more busyness to their schedules, but also creating something that's meaningful enough for them where they want their child to be a part of it and it's not just more busyness to their schedule. I think I just talked in a circle, but essentially what I'm saying is that I find it extremely challenging oftentimes to meet the needs of the family when the family is so busy. That's what I wanted to say. So, and anywhere in the world, I think, I would go back to Israel in a heartbeat, but maybe Chile, because that's where my husband's from. So there you go. What about you, Scott? What's the most challenging aspect of youth ministry? Give us your 30-second answer. Go.
Most challenging aspect of youth ministry is working with parents and seeing the need for that. This isn't just like basketball or track or
band, that's right.
You know,
yeah,
that this will last longer than.
Amen. Yeah. What about anywhere that you could go in the world? Where would you go?
Hawaii.
Ooh, fun.
We were supposed to go to Hawaii for one of our anniversaries, and we were going to try doing it for our 25th, but we didn't make it. So maybe 30. Hopefully,
I was just going to say, hopefully you made it 25 years of marriage. Hopefully that's what you did not make it in, right?
Yeah.
That's right. Just didn't make it to Hawaii. Perfect. Cool. All right. So let's move along. All right. So here's where we're headed today. So we're going to take a look at Growing Young's research on student leadership. We're going to take a dive into the Jewish understanding of Jesus' teaching to his disciples at Caesarea Philippi. And we'll have a group discussion on best practices for molding student leaders. All right. Here we go. So probably many of you are very familiar with Growing Young's research. What they did was they took around, I think it was 600 churches, and they did research to find out what are some key components that keep young people connected to the church. And what they found was there were 6 key components. And one of those was what they called key chain leadership. And so here's what they have to say about those keys that we as youth leaders hold. The keys are the capabilities, power, and access of the leaders that carry the potential to empower young people. And leaders who know how to empower young people with the keys of the church are intentional about entrusting and empowering all generations, including teenagers and emerging adults, with their own set of keys. Also, they say, instead of centralizing authority, empower others, especially young people. So if I could be super brutally honest, empowering people with keys of leadership was not a part of who I was years ago. In fact, for many years, I was extremely insecure. I was deeply afraid that people would like other leaders more than me, and that would make me replaceable. In fact, I remember very specifically a mission trip where the students were kind of all flocking to this one leader, and I could tell that they really seemed to enjoy him and they liked him a lot and they felt really comfortable with him and they would talk to him. And instead of celebrating and rejoicing in that and looking for ways to pass more leadership off to him, I felt extremely intimidated and jealous. And looking back on that, I'm really, I'm disappointed in how I handled myself, because at that time, I was really just operating out of my insecurity. And it wasn't until I had a very upfront, in-my-face conversation with some mentors of mine that this thinking on leadership and passing those keys really became a part of who I was. I remember I was studying for my master's degree, and I was challenged with the task of inviting mentors into my life who would speak hard truths. So I asked 2 gentlemen in the church who were connected to the youth ministry, and I asked them to speak truth into my life. And I said, where do I need to grow and change? And both of them, without having talked to each other prior to, and without having, they both said exactly the same thing. They said, Heather, you live above people. You come across as holier than thou, and you're unapproachable to students. And I was like, what? And I realized at that moment that my insecurity had not just infected the way that I led adults, but it infected the way that I led teenagers. And that was a changing day for me, where we had a fall retreat coming up a few days after that. And I remember as I was preparing for it, I just was so ready to bring a word from the Lord about how these students, needed to live more for Jesus. And I remember our theme that year was counterfeit. And that in preparation for that weekend, the Lord said to me, no, Heather, the counterfeit is you. You're the one that tries to live above people. You're the one that's deeply insecure. And you're the one that actually desperately needs Jesus, just as much as every single one of these students does. And I communicated that to my students, and something changed that day in my youth ministry, where we went from surfacing ministry to deep, powerful ministry. And I started to look for ways to pass off keys to young people and to adults, to the point where when it was a youth Sunday, I no longer filled the most significant spots, but I looked for ways to pass off those keys to the students or even to the adults who were serving in the ministry. And I celebrated that. And it took me a while to get there because, as it says here on this next slide, in the second box here more specifically, but I'll read the first here. It says, Growing Young asserts that keychain leaders, very aware of the keys they hold, are constantly opening doors for some while training and entrusting others who are ready for their own set of keys. Being someone who shares the keys requires humility and trust. If you're a key hoarding leader, it probably means you have some control and fear issues, similar to what I did. The writers of Growing Young found that for people who moved from key hoarding to key sharing, their maturity was born out of difficult personal and professional experience, failure, and other struggles. That's definitely been me. I remember one of my very best youth leaders, Marty will know him, his name's Mike. He said to me one day, he said, Heather, you've got to share this ministry with so many people and give so many others the opportunity to lead that people don't know who the leader is. An unwillingness to share keys simply reveals an insecurity in you, as I shared before. Ask yourself a hard question. Is there any part of you that fears sharing leadership roles with others? And if so, why? So I just want you to kind of think about that. Maybe after we get off the call, kind of contemplate that question to yourself and ask the Lord what's there. And don't feel alone in that, because I've been there too, if that's something that you're dealing with. So I want to kind of just open it up for some discussion real quick here. We'll just take a couple minutes here. As we think about this idea of student leadership and passing off the keys of leadership to students. And in the book, First Century Youth Ministry, I write about different ways that we can do that. We can look for ways for students to serve on a Sunday morning, whether it's in the kids ministry or in the tech booth or on the greeting team or on the missions committee or these other different areas where they could serve and be visibly serving within the church, maybe on the worship team or something like that, where we're constantly looking for ways to empower our students. I remember I had a student, his name is Trenton, and I just kept passing him keys because he was a freshman and he was more mature than a lot of my older kids. And so I just kept passing him keys, and he kept proving himself to where he preached a couple times on Youth Sunday and he rocked it. And, it was so exciting for me to see him succeed in those ways. And so the question that I have to you is, actually, I think I just want you to think about this for a second, and then maybe let's talk about the second question. So how visible on a Sunday morning are the students at your church? If they're not visible, why? And then let's discuss this question. How comfortable is your church passing off keys of leadership to students?
Everyone at once, right?
Everybody at once. You go first, Scott.
Yeah, we do have students that serve in different areas on a Sunday morning, from worship team to students in our children's ministry.
Nice.
And I actually even tell our children's pastor that I would love to see our children or our students serving in kids ministry on Sunday mornings, rather than being in my own class or what we do, because we already have something Sunday night anyway.
Okay.
But students get so much more out of serving and preparing and being able to do that. So if they're serving, it's better for them to be there. And the other place that I've seen this happen real recently is more in our student ministry, of having students serve within the student ministry. My senior pastor came to me, and his daughter was kind of disinterested in coming to youth group as a sophomore. And he's like, I need some dad help here. What is it? And I said, well, maybe what Regan needs is to give to the student ministry instead of take.
Nice.
And so he challenged her with that. And she's been, along with another high school student, they're leading our junior high girls small group now. And
Very cool.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, at the church that I was just at previously, that's what we had. We had our high school students serving in our middle school ministry. And that went really great. They love that. Yeah. Anybody else? How comfortable is your church passing up keys of leadership to students?
My church is never, that I'm aware of, I've only been here 2.5 years, but that I'm aware of, I don't think my church has ever had students in a leadership position.
Okay.
And that's something that I want to change. And I've talked with, we had our annual leadership conference last November, and I just read Growing Young prior to that, and I talked to the pastor about it. Like, there's some things here, because we're trying to get younger people coming to church, because we don't have a whole lot. And so I did a presentation on basically the 6 steps that they went out in there, but nothing ever really came of it.
Okay.
You know, I mentioned, we need to get students involved. We need to do this, and this, and nothing really came of it. And so now, since COVID hit, we're trying to just kind of build back to where we were, prior to March, basically. Good. And it's something that I want to look for. And I do consider, where can I put students in? But at the same time, trying to get students to want to be more involved in the church than just, come to church, come to youth group on Sunday night to have some fun. That's another that is kind of a struggle for me.
And, it sounds to me like Scott has a cool, I think these are moments where we can encourage each other and kind of sharpen one another and say, well, look at Scott's ministry. He's got kids who are serving in the kids ministry or serving in the middle school ministry. And maybe I feel like that one will probably be down the road, but potentially could there be kids who would want to serve in the kids ministry or do different things like that, or help in the tech booth or in other small ways? There's a plethora of ways to get them plugged in, but it is different when the church culture is not used to that kind of way of thinking. Yeah, definitely. Okay. Anybody else want to dive in or hop in on anything? Maybe you've got a really cool thing that your students do, student leadership wise, that you would love to share. And if you don't, that's okay.
One other thing just to add is, if you get students that want to help teach or lead, take them up on that, because what will end up happening is they appreciate you more. I've had now 2 different times recently where students come up with an idea of, hey, we should have this. And I'm like, well, okay, why don't you put it together and write through it and write it out and all that kind of stuff, and let's meet together. And they realize how long it takes to put together a message or lessons or teaching, and they're like, you do this every week kind of thing. And so and then let them teach it.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I've had that a few different times where and I just had one now, and one of the kids was at Chick-fil-A in the line there. He's like, hey, did you read my Google Doc? And I'm like, yep. And I said, let's get together later this week and see when you can start teaching that. So
that's awesome. All right. We've got time for one more quick addition if anybody has anything.
I don't have anything crazy, but yeah, I think we're trying to empower students more, so they serve a lot in different ministries in our church.
Nice.
Our grade 12s, usually once they're in grade 11 or 12, we let them lead in junior high. And so
Okay.
either on a Sunday or our junior and senior high nights are the same. So sometimes it's hard to convince them to miss their own group for the sake of serving, but some of them are willing. And then there's some good leadership structures at our denominational events, like retreats and stuff, where they MC or they'll be part of the planning committee.
Nice.
And I've seen them really shine with that. So
that's neat.
But I feel like there's more ways we could do it for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Kate. Mark Canister says that nothing is more reflective of healthy student ministries than students who launch into the full and robust life of the church. So right now I want us to take a look at a time where Jesus passes some keys of leadership to his little youth group. It says here in Matthew 16, Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Now, I understand that this is a hotly debated portion of Scripture, and that there are different church traditions who feel very differently about how to interpret this. And I simply want to offer a perspective from a Jewish look at this Scripture. You may come away and go, "I don't agree with what you said, Heather," and that's okay. But I want us to simply take a look at, from the Jewish world in which Jesus lived in, what's quite possible that Jesus was communicating to his disciples here in Caesarea Philippi. Ray Vander Laan says this about Caesarea Philippi. "In this place, Israelite King Jeroboam built the high place that angered God and eventually led the Israelites to worship false gods. Eventually, worship of the Baals was replaced with worship of Greek fertility gods. Caesarea Philippi, which stood in a lush area near the foot of Mount Hermon, became the religious center for worship for the Greek god Pan. The Greeks named the city Panias in his honor. Years later, when Romans conquered the territory, Herod Philip rebuilt the city and named it after himself. But Caesarea Philippi continued to focus on the worship of Greek gods. In the cliff that stood above the city, local people built shrines and temples to Pan. To the pagan mind, the cave at Caesarea Philippi created a gate to the underworld where fertility gods lived during the winter. They committed detestable acts to worship these false gods. Caesarea Philippi's location was especially unique because it stood at the base of a cliff where spring water flowed. At one time, the water ran directly from the mouth of a cave set in the bottom of the cliff. The pagans of Jesus' day commonly believed that their fertility gods lived in the underworld during the winter and returned to earth each spring. They saw water as a symbol of the underworld and thought that their gods traveled to and from that world through caves. To the pagan mind, then, the cave and spring water at Caesarea Philippi created a gate to the underworld. So, the people in Caesarea Philippi worshipped a Greek god named Pan. Pan was this half goat, half man that was worshipped for, they would do these, words are getting cut in my mouth. They would do these detestable, sinful sexual acts, hoping to arouse this god Pan so that fertility would fall upon their land. And so as we see here on the bottom picture on the right there, we see that there's a large cave opening. And here is where the temple to the god Pan was. And I remember when we were in Caesarea Philippi and we were looking at this portion of the land there. And as you can see, that big, large mouth opening there is the opening to the cave where that spring water flowed. So as Ray Vander Laan was talking about, that the Jews and even the pagans of this time believed that that was a gate to the underworld, or in the Jewish mind, as it's understood, the gate to hell, or the gate to Hades, if you will. And so if you see here, and then off to the side here, there's kind of that U that's darker, and then you see there's little almost kind of impressions above it, and all spread throughout are these gods, or excuse me, they were these idols that the people had made of Pan. And so this half goat, half man, you see all these little statues kind of all spread throughout this area, because again, this was the temple. This was the place in which those who were worshiping God, the god Pan, went to worship him. And so when we look at the scripture here, I remember we were standing on this hillside in Caesarea Philippi, and below us was that cave area and that the temple to the god Pan, and you know, the Jews believed that this is the place to the underworld. The gates of Hades were there. And I remember John had us up there on the hillside. He said, imagine that Jesus has himself and his disciples, and they're up there on this hillside, and he says these words. Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter," and boom. And then John pointed. He pointed at that gate to the underworld. He pointed at that rock where they went and they worshiped this god Pan. And he says, and on this rock of Caesarea Philippi, the place where the pagans worship this false god. And in fact, it would have been as if Jesus was taking his disciples to the red light district, right? Like, we're in the worst part of Las Vegas where we're surrounded by really, really awful, terrible stuff, right? And he says, on this rock, on places like Caesarea Philippi, I will build my church. Boom. And check this. And the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he ordered his disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. So Jesus does a few more kind of Jewish things here when he's talking to his disciples. Not only is it quite possible that he took his hands and pointed at that rock there in Caesarea Philippi, the place where the pagans would worship the god Pan, and the place where they believed that their other gods lived in this underworld, in this gates of Hades, if you will. He says, I give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Now, this was a kind of a thing that was given to the house of David, right? These keys to the kingdom. And when we look at these keys, we see that they were keys of authority, that they were keys that Jesus was passing off to them to open the door to the gospel, to bring the gospel to the Gentile world, is what Jesus was doing here. And so he says, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. This was a Jewish kind of way of talking, right? And so what Jesus was doing was he was saying, and we kind of talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the Talmud and the oral law, is that the rabbis, the sages of Jesus's day and prior and after, would make these rabbinical interpretations of how to live out Torah. And it was kind of these legal interpretations, right? So for example, well, how many steps can you take on the Sabbath? And what does it mean that you can't, whatever, right? According to what it says in the law. And we see that the disciples do this in the book of Acts. They practice this principle of binding and loosing. So whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. So Jesus is saying, I'm giving you the authority to make interpretations of how to teach people how to follow me. And so we see this in the book of Acts where there's some Gentiles and the Jews are like, hey, should we make them be circumcised? And so, some of the people come together, and Peter's like, no, they just can't eat the blood of strangled animals. They can't, there's a few more things they couldn't do. But yeah, then they can come into the community of faith. And so they decided that they didn't have to become Jewish per se in order to come into the community of faith. So that was an example of binding and loosing that the disciples practiced in the New Testament. So, okay. So here's the thing, is that when we see this picture here where Jesus is passing these keys of leadership to his disciples, and he's saying to them, look, my church, build my church on some of the most sinful places, and the gates of hell will not overcome it. So the question is that how are we preparing our students to reach their own Caesarea Philippi? I don't know about you, but when I look at the teenage community, I see a lot of those places that are very present in their world. So have we trained our students on how to share the gospel, how to talk to their friends about spiritual matters? Have we provided an opportunity for them to invite their friends to come and learn about God, to become empowered to reach their peers on their sports teams, after school job, friendship group, art, music, or drama club? Have we given them the keys of leadership, the power through Jesus, and the confidence to reach their own Caesarea Philippi? So let's talk about it. How do you know when a student is ready for a set of keys? So I'll give you guys a couple seconds or a few seconds to think about that. How do you know when a student is ready for a set of keys or for leadership? I know I just kind of threw a lot at you. You're probably digesting some of the things that I just talked about. What do you think, Scott?
I think when students start asking, hey, is there something I can help you with? Can I help you with, maybe it's even just as like setting up chairs or doing that kind of stuff. See that there's an interest there.
Sure.
And then you maybe ask them to do more.
Yeah.
I think also going back to the other thing that you were talking about, you know, do we teach them how to share the gospel? You know, one of the things I've used is Dare to Share has great resources and equipping. They moved to doing conferences, to doing these live events where you can equip your students right at your own town and do that. So being able to train them how to do that. And something cool happened about a year ago. Our area code is 419, and Matthew 4:19 actually says, "Come follow me, I will make you fishers of men."
Nice.
And so what we did is we started a group called Crew 419, and on the back of the T-shirt that we have, it has 6,265, and I found out how many students are enrolled in all the middle school, high school students in our area.
Nice.
And under it says whatever it takes. So a little Avengers in there too.
Nice.
And
cool.
So what we want to see is every student in our area hear the gospel from a friend and respond to the gospel from a friend.
Amen.
And so as they wear those T-shirts around, kids will be like, what's Crew 419? Well, that gives them a way to get into that gospel conversation. So
Cool. Yeah. Very cool. Thanks for sharing that, Scott.
Yeah.
So then I guess the next question is, and I got to keep moving here a little bit because I have some stuff at the end that I want to make sure that we hit on, but be thinking about that in your own ministry. You know, how do you know when a student is ready for a set of keys? And I think Scott brings up a great point. If they ask, that means that they're hungry and they're ready and they want to serve. I think a lot of the times the kids that show up early, they're usually the ones that want to be there. They're the ones that are looking for something more to be a part of and something more to do. The kids who are growing in maturity, the kids who are leading in other ways, maybe outside in the community, look for ways to plug them in inside of your church to use those gifts. I think I oftentimes see kids gravitate towards other leadership positions in other places because we just haven't empowered them well a lot of the times within inside of our church walls. And so, but that raises another question because, you know, I've done the whole thing with kind of having student leadership groups in the past before. And as you know, kids struggle. And so how do you respond when a student fails or drops the ball? Because I think it's so important that we are prepared and ready for this and we know how to respond because it's going to happen. So I'll just throw out there, maybe one or two people that might want to respond to that. How do you respond when a student fails or drops the ball?
You kick them out of youth group, right?
That's right, Marty.
I think, you know,
send them to Scott's youth group. They'll be fine.
No, I would think I've never had to do this, but just based on what I've gone through, and how Heather dealt with me when I messed up on my internship. Like there was one time I bought a ton of Pop-Tarts because she just put down 16 Pop-Tarts. So I thought 16 boxes. She did not mean 16 boxes. But anyways, back to the question.
I meant 16 Pop-Tarts.
Yeah, like 2 boxes or 1 box.
Yeah.
That was a fun return trip to Walmart. But anyways, I think it's just coming alongside them, talking to them and just having grace.
Yes.
Because they're still teenagers. They're still learning and not coming down hard on them, but helping them figure out how they could improve for the next time that they're in that position.
That's right. Yeah. I've definitely screwed up in this, where I think the first time around, I wish I would have handled it differently. I removed the student from the leadership position, and I did put steps in place for them to be restored to that leadership position. I had them set up with another adult mentor who was going to shepherd them and kind of walk alongside of them. But there are ways in which looking back, I wish I would have handled it differently, from the sense of, I don't know if I would have removed them from their leadership position and taken that away from them. I think I would have allowed them to stay as long as they were being shepherded by that adult leader. Because we don't see that Jesus does that with Peter. we see that in his humility, that Jesus continues to use him and gives him even more leadership responsibility, even though he's messed up. So there's definitely areas that I wish I would have done differently when it comes to students kind of dropping the ball. As Murray said, it's really a lot about grace. And I think sometimes in the church, we forget and get confused on even how to really live that out. And so if others have, thoughts or responses that they want to give that would be beneficial to the group, go for it.
I would just say, think of the words fail forward. Using your failures to move forward. And so even when students might have a failure, don't do the negative side. Oh, look, you messed up. But what did we learn from that? What will we do in the next time? And so, and there was one church that I was at, my senior pastor said, I expect you to fail. So if you have, because then you're taking risks. Like,
Amen.
Where I'm at, my senior pastor says that you need to take gospel risks.
Amen.
It's expected. And not everything always works out the way that you think in your head it's going to work out. So
yeah. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Well, if you ever need help figuring out a leadership thing and you feel a little bit stuck, just reach out to me. And I don't know if I'd have the answer, but I can help you process through it. So, but let's review. So today was a little bit shorter. I've got some stuff at the end I want to run through with you guys. And that Caesarea Philippi portion was a pretty heavy one to digest too. But I think some of the most important key things for us to remember today is that secure leaders are constantly looking for ways to pass off leadership opportunities for students and other adults. Caesarea Philippi was a pagan place where people worshiped the god Pan. The Jews believed that the gates to Hades, or the underworld, was there. Share your ministry and empower your student leaders. So, just kind of walk through this real quick here. I've got that fun little coupon code for y'all here as well. Future trips to Israel for youth workers. I'm looking at hoping to do next summer. We'll see, if not next summer, the following summer. So if that interests you at all, please reach out to me. I think y'all are on the Facebook page, so that's great. JC Studies Institute. So my friend James has given us a 50% off of their Behold the Man course. I took this course. It is excellent. Oopsies, go back, no. I'm going to, I'll put this in the chat. I can't copy and paste it right now, but once we're done here, I'll put this in the chat, and that way y'all can have the link and the coupon code. But I think there's 12 sessions to this. The teachings are about 40 minutes each, and they are really good. So if you're wanting to continue kind of exploring the Jewish roots of your faith, this is really excellent teaching here by Dwight Pryor, who is no longer living, but truly was a real scholar in his day. You can also use the coupon code FCYM in the Youth Cartel store to get 25% off of my book. And then, as I mentioned this last time, I would love to come in now that our 4 sessions have completed and offer a free 1-hour training session for you and your youth ministry team or staff. If you'd like to have me come in and do 2, 3, or 4 courses, I would just simply ask for a little bit of a fee for that. But again, if money is tight for your budget and you don't have the money right now, I would do all 4 courses for free for your group. It would be a pleasure for me. So if you'd like to sign up, if you'd be the first person to book me for that, I'd offer a $10 discount and a free autographed book from me to you. And then also, if you just need some ministry support, would love an ear. I'd love to offer some free coaching for you guys too. So now that our time has come to a close, if you would, I would love it if you all would do this for me. I'm going to drop this link here in the chat. I created just, it's like a 2-minute survey. It'll take you maybe 2 to 3 minutes. If you would just take this for me, it will help me in knowing how to make this course better, to see if there's interest in doing something more like something like this in the future. And so, yeah, I'll give you guys a couple minutes, and then we'll wrap things up with questions and other stuff. Okay? Thank you. Okay, all right. Looks like everybody's back. I can see, I think. So thanks, guys, for filling that out for me. That will help me in knowing how to make these courses better and what they'll look like in the future. I'm hoping to do more in the future. I really enjoy doing them. I'm very passionate about kind of sharing more about the Jewish roots of our faith and how they intersect with youth ministry. And so it would be a true privilege for me to come and share to any one of your groups if you enjoy that, or if your team would enjoy that. That would really bless me as well. And then other than that, I need to reshare my screen because I had something else that I wanted to talk about. So 1 second here. I need to give you guys that 50% off discount code too. So, so does anybody have any questions at all about anything that I said? I know that I kind of breezed through some stuff fairly quickly. So, and I know that I've talked about a lot of things over the last 4 weeks too. So maybe you have a question about something that I talked about in a previous session. Now would be the time. Let me ask this question. Had anyone ever heard that perspective on Jesus's teaching at Caesarea Philippi?
I think you told it to me when I was your student at some point.
Is that right? That's probably true.
It sounds familiar.
That's funny.
I remember being there and seeing that.
Yeah.
It's kind of creepy.
It is creepy. Yeah. It's wild. All the different places where there's different types of pagan worship. And then it's also wild when you put yourself in the context and you're like, oh, this is what Jesus meant. And because Jesus was always using, right? The Jews were literary geniuses when it came to the way that they wrote and the way that they communicated. They were constantly using metaphors and word pictures and their surroundings to communicate deeper meanings and truths, as we've learned about with the Remez and with stringing pearls and with these other rabbinical teaching tools that Jesus and his contemporaries would have used, that if we're not careful, we'll miss them. And that's why I think this encounter here at Caesarea Philippi is so intriguing and so interesting. And it is meaningful in light of how we empower our students to reach their own Caesarea Philippi. So any questions at all?
I had a bit of a, I don't know if this is a good question. So you can answer it if you think it is. If you don't think it is,
then I'll tell you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we talked about how, well, Jews, but Jesus, rabbis would often talk in stories or parables.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed through, I forget who first told me this idea, but basically that to the crowds, Jesus would talk in parables.
Mm-hmm.
And he would say, like, they're not going to understand. And then for the disciples who kind of explain the deeper meaning. And it's kind of like he's using these stories that are about like heavenly kingdom things to teach them spiritual principles, but really only people who really wanted to know the meaning would go this step further to figure it out.
Okay.
So, A, is that true? And then B, like, do you have any suggestions for how we can employ tactics like that in youth ministry? Like, because I find we're so literal sometimes that there's like this sense of mystery or wonder or curiosity that is lost.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have suggestions for how to kind of invigorate that kind of like, into your teaching.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Kate. So the first question, I have not really explored that myself all that well, but I think what you're saying makes absolute sense from a spiritual standpoint. So I think I would answer that in saying, I think you're on the right track. And I can, if I come across something that would tell me otherwise, I'll let you know. But I think, I'm sure that there's some sort of Jewish meaning there that maybe we're all missing a little bit of. But it sounds to me like you're on the right track there. That that Jesus is communicating to his audience, and some are spiritually ripe and can hear and understand, and some are not, and they're just not internalizing what he's saying because they're not viewing it from what he's saying, but from what they're maybe expecting him and wanting him to say. If that makes sense. And then your second question. So we talked a little bit about this. I think it was last week when we talked about, I think it was week 2 in Transformed by the Torah, where we discussed kind of some different ways, different teaching styles. And I think what you'll find is that when you become a communicator who takes a word but brings it to life, is that when you can take something and use a creative element, whether it's an object or, for example, I was teaching on, oh gosh, I've used so many different silly things in my lessons. I nearly every week, this probably the last 2 years of my teaching, I would always have something that I would have in my hand, or something that I would put on, or something that I would use as some sort of object lesson. Because I really think that's what helps kind of people have these aha moments and these connections, when they can connect what you're saying to an object that you're holding. And this is what Jesus did. He might not necessarily have been holding a sickle, but people knew what a sickle was, and he talked about it. And so I think for us as communicators in the youth ministry community, if we can connect what we're saying to either something that we're holding or to something that a student spends a lot of time with, we can connect it in their mind that goes, oh, okay, so it's like my cell phone, or it's, for example, I was telling this story about my dad, and the message that I did was that we are a messenger for God, right? We were talking about the book of Galatians, and we see in Galatians chapter 1 that Paul calls himself a messenger, right? And so that was my message. And so what I did was I talked about my dad, who was a postman. And at the beginning of my message, I was putting on his postman outfit. And I put on his shirt, and I put on his hat, and I had his little satchel bag, right? And I'm talking about my dad and how we are a messenger for God. And now all of a sudden the students are going, oh, I remember what Heather said. I remember she was putting on that thing, and how we're a messenger for God. And if you notice as well, in Jesus's teachings, I mean, the Sermon on the Mount is how big? like, I don't know, 5 minutes, right? And we take these messages and we think they need to be like 20, 25 minutes long. And Jesus would speak in very direct ways, and he would say short things, and he would tie in an object to it so that people could remember it. And I think in youth ministry, we would do well to teach. And I'm not saying that we should just have 5-minute lessons, but what I'm saying is that we would do well to say less by saying more, if that makes sense, or to say more by saying less. Maybe I should say it like that. And so I think, Kate, you're definitely headed the right direction in wanting to make your messages come more to life. And I would just encourage you to look for things around your world or in your own experience. I remember Heather Fleece hearing her share this one time, and she said, sometimes I take my old yearbooks and I look back through my old yearbooks and I look at my hair and I look at my surroundings, and it just helps me remember when I was their age, what I was thinking and what I was feeling. And so now I'm talking about that one time during lunch when nobody let me sit at the table, or I'm talking about that other time when those girls took my shorts and flushed them down the toilet, right? And so now I've got this story that connects us, me and my teenagers together, because they understand, because they're living in that world right now. So is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else want to ask any other questions or
well, I just want to build on what you were talking about, Heather. Is hey, Kate, I'm not the most creative person in the world. Like, I struggle with creativity. And so this morning I legitimately went through like all the youth group lessons. It's a process, but I'm going through my youth group lessons for the year. And as I'm planning more and more, trying to find some kind of object lesson. And for example, this Sunday for Sunday school, it's not youth group, but for Sunday school, we're talking about King Saul. I'm doing a Bible characters series in Sunday school. And so with King Saul, we're doing 1 Samuel 19, where Saul, it's his first attempt to kill David. Mm-hmm. And yeah. and at the
You're trying to kill a student?
No.
That'd be awesome.
I got a spear. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to pin him to the wall. But instead what I did was, I don't know if you're familiar with this object lesson, but with toothpaste. Some people use toothpaste as like, with your words. If you say something, if you squeeze toothpaste out, you can't really get it back in the tube very easily. It's the same thing with words. Well, it goes the same way with actions. Once you do something, you can't get it back. Mm-hmm. So while Saul didn't really think through his actions of trying to kill David, and the story goes on from chapter 19. So I'm going to bring a tube of toothpaste and show him, just like you can't get,
That's good.
Just like you can't get toothpaste back in the tube, you can't undo actions that you perform if there's an importance about thinking first and not just doing that initial reaction to whatever it might be.
Nice, Marty. I like that one.